Radio stations all across the state of Michigan, from the Capitol and right across the street from the Capitol building. It's Michael Patrick Shiels, right next door to the Michigan Freedom Fund offices, and that's where Tony Daunt brings us from this morning through our AT&T microphones. He's the executive director of that Michigan Freedom Fund. Welcome back to the program, sir.
Good morning, Michael Patrick. Thanks for having me.
Did you watch or listen to the debate last night?
I will be very honest, I did not. I was out with friends having dinner and a few drinks, and I think my evening went much better than if I had watched that.
I'm curious to see. It was 2.5 hours long in Detroit there. I'm curious to see what the ratings will be for last night and for tonight, too, because CNN is charging an awful lot of money for the commercials, and this is their chance against to make some hay in the primary process. It's their turn to have one of the debates, so we'll see how that all shakes out.
It's got to be a moneymaker, or they wouldn't agree to do it.
Yeah, they're heavy in there in downtown Detroit. Now, we keep hearing about the redistricting commission, and we heard about it last year during the ballot proposal. We went to the polls and so forth and so on. And now the word is that Republicans are suing to stop the new redistricting commission before it even begins. Take us back to the beginning, if you would, and bring us up to where we are now, because this is a little bit of insider baseball. But not really, because it affects all of us.
Well, absolutely. I'm sure that your listeners are pretty well educated and have heard of this commission. Know that it came about in 2018 with a vote of the people as a constitutional amendment, and it establishes a so-called independent commission to handle redistricting, which is the drawing of lines for the state legislature and Congress. And, I'm sure the listeners also know that me, Tony Daunt, and the organization I work for, the Michigan Freedom Fund, we're very much involved fighting this, for a variety of reasons. It passed. But that doesn't undo the fact that one of the components of this is various restrictions on who can serve on the commission. And we believe those are fundamental violations of constitutional rights afforded every American citizen and every Michigan citizen. And specifically, that's the violations of the First Amendment, which obviously freedom of speech, religion, and assembly and association, and allows us to be involved in the political process and to speak our mind without punishment by the government for doing so.
How many people will be on the commission?
So the commission will have 15 individuals. It's set up to have 4 who identify as Republican, 4 who identify as Democrat, and then 5 who identify as independent or no party. And so, you've got, and obviously, rather than independent, I would contend it's partisan. It's majority partisan because you've got 8 of the 13 individuals identify as being affiliated with one of the major political parties.
Do they have to pinky swear to that, or do they have to be actually card-carrying members? I mean, how do you know that someone's even telling the truth?
Another great question, because in Michigan, you don't register by party affiliation when you register to vote, unlike you do in many other states in the United States. And so, really, the only thing that you've got is the application that you fill out and maybe an affidavit that states, I'm being truthful. But a lot of room for gamesmanship by people on either side who want to try and stack the deck in their favor. And then, independent. What's a true independent? Is it somebody who in the last 4 elections has voted for half Democrats and half Republicans, or they voted for Republicans 3 times and a Democrat once? Is that an independent? Is it that they voted for, the Democrat or Republican for president back in 1968, and they've been straight party one way or the other since then? There's no way of determining that, and that's one of the many problems with this commission. But ultimately, what we've got now is the violations of the U.S. Constitution and those protections, both the First Amendment, as I laid out, and the 14th Amendment of due process. And one of the more egregious prohibitions on this ability to serve is that you are prohibited by virtue of who you are related to, because that individual, let's say, my daughter, if she was 18, by virtue of the work I do, she would be prohibited from serving us on this commission. My mother, not politically active, she's prohibited from serving on this commission by virtue of what I do. And, setting aside the prohibition on those who are engaged in the civic process, this idea that you can be punished, prohibited from serving on a commission by virtue of who you're related to, is just really absurd. And it's a fundamental violation I think the courts need to address.
Tony Daunt from Michigan Freedom Fund is the lead plaintiff in this new suit. And so the idea is that the people who would be selected for the commission, who would draw the lines that would define our congressional and legislative districts, would be completely devoid of any political involvement?
That's the supposed intention, yes. And again, that's not to litigate the issue from a perspective of being on the ballot, but that's I think a fundamental problem is that it's purporting to want people to be civically engaged, to be part of the process. And yet those who have taken it upon themselves, who have spent their free time being involved in the political process, whether that's conservative, Republican, liberal, Democrat, what have you, you're involved, you're prohibited from serving. And I think that is really a cynical way of going about things. And ultimately, as you see with this language and what we're fighting in this lawsuit, is it's created some very serious constitutional questions, and I believe blatant violations that should be addressed by the court and have this thing solved once and for all.
Former Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker, I see, involved and supportive. Just 20 seconds left, but how soon do you think you could get a ruling?
Oh, goodness. If I had a crystal ball, I would be able to tell you right now how things turn out. But, usually it takes a few weeks once the judge is assigned for them to schedule and arguments go back.
I wanted to follow up again with Tony Daunt, Executive Director of the Michigan Freedom Fund and the lead plaintiff in the lawsuit against the Citizen Redistricting Commission. He's going to court, and I imagine this is the type of sort of bellwether argument that could go all the way to the Supreme Court. Are you willing to do that if that's what it takes?
Absolutely. Willing to go as far as we need to go to have these questions addressed and have these violations properly adjudicated before the courts.
How far along are they, if you know, in organizing the Citizens Commission?
I know basically just what everybody else knows, that the Secretary of State's office just recently released their kind of draft guidelines on the application process and draft guidelines on who can serve, and that again leads to one of the questions we're dealing with. And so, I think they're moving forward, but I think ultimately it will be in vain because of the violations that are inherent in here. If the ingredients to a cake are poisoned, you can't bake the cake. And that's what we're arguing here with this commission.
So therefore, I'm not an attorney, but I play one on TV. Do you ask for like a cease and desist to bring the whole thing to a halt till it's determined?
Yeah, asking for an injunction to halt any kind of implementation of this, and ultimately, layman's terms, throw this thing out altogether, because the violations of constitutional protections are so egregious and so inherent in this commission that it cannot move forward.
And if that is the case, then are the lines redrawn the way they traditionally are? Because there's a bit of a deadline in that regard, isn't there? There is very much a deadline, and I think hopefully that will help with the courts to move this thing along quickly. And I do believe if this was to be thrown out as unconstitutional, then we would, unless something changes between now and the next drawing of the lines, it would be done under the current process of the legislature and then signage by the governor. Okay, people can get more information or maybe join the cause if you like. How? By going to our website, MichiganFreedomFund.com, signing up for our newsletter, Front Lines of Freedom, and you'll get it every week. Okay, Tony Daunt, thank you very much. Michigan Freedom Fund with Michael Patrick Shiels.